Hello, class, and welcome to our video review of the chapter, The Language of Argument Definition, from Writing Logically, Thinking Critically. And what I want to do is focus on the key terms with relation to critical thinking strategies and the Essay 3 topic. So remember, this essay is an extended definition. You're going beyond the traditional denotation, one of the words in the chapter, dictionary literal definition of the word, to examine how it is abstract. And quite frankly, one of the easiest ways to understand the word abstract, right, is that it means difficult to understand. So what's difficult to understand about all of these terms that you can choose from to write about? What's difficult to understand about depression? What's difficult to understand about identity? What's difficult to understand about addiction? And I think in all of these terms, and there's quite a few: courage, education, defeat. I think for all of these, as you focus your analysis on characters from stories, poems, and plays, what you'll realize is if the characters are dealing with issues, right? Issues with identity, issues with depression, issues with addiction, issues with courage, issues with education, or if they're examples of education not put to use logically, courage not used logically, right? You can use the critical thinking strategies that we've been discussing throughout the semester: Occam's razor, logos instead of hidden assumptions and illogical emotional appeals, using Rogerian strategy, using dialectical thinking. Those all relate to this paper topic. So what's abstract about the word? What's difficult to understand? We all understand depression is a form of sadness, right? Despair. But we don't understand how to work through it. Could one use critical thinking skills to better work through one's depression, right? To better apply courage, to better change one's identity, right? To better deal with addiction. And remember, page 60 in Writing Logically, Thinking Critically discusses the idea of philosophical counseling, in which, right, and I'm going to read to you from page 60 right here in your book, and you can use this as a source for this essay. A new kind of therapy called philosophical counseling is based on the belief that many personal problems stem from faulty logic, from irrational assumptions. When you look at that video analyzing that scene in Hamlet, where we looked at how his hidden assumptions, his irrational assumptions get the best of him. He doesn't use Occam's razor. He doesn't use Rogerian strategy. He does not kill Claudius. And then he lets his hubris get the best of him. And he then moves on and kills Polonius, which is completely illogical. So again, for this essay, and that's why it's part of the chapter on the language of argument definition, we want to first understand what's abstract about the term and then analyze fiction to make a point about depression, about identity, about courage, right? That's what we do. As the first readings in reading and writing about literature told us, when we read literature, we learn about life. When we write about literature, we're writing about the human experience, right? What theme or themes, what issues, right, will your readers learn about in your extended definition analysis? So I want to look at the example from the book, and I want to just go over the terms to make sure everybody's clear, right? Denotation, dictionary definition: abstract, difficult to understand, right? The book talked about the abstraction ladder, a mental model, the various levels of abstraction and concreteness that describe our language and thought. And when you look at the abstraction ladder in the book, right, on page 102, the importance of concrete examples, right? They list them from wealth to asset to farm assets to livestock to a cow named Bessie. So when you're giving examples, try to be specific and relate those examples to your extended definition of the term. As we're moving forward in the chapter, right, we had the poem, The Voice You Hear When You Read Silently. Now that poem is dealing with the abstract idea of the word voice, because normally when we think of voice, we think of vocal, what we hear. But from a literature standpoint, right, a particular opinion or attitude expressed, the voice of the writer, not literally the sound produced in the person's larynx. So what this poem is better understanding is the voice you hear when you read silently. It's the voice you hear in your head. So it's the writer's opinions or attitudes expressed, but the sound, if you were to read it out loud, would be coming out of your mouth. That's why I suggested for those of you, if your poem that you were explicating for explication essay number 2, if when you Googled the title, your author, maybe there was a YouTube video of your author reading it, it's pretty cool to hear the author read their own work. So not only are you getting their actual sound of their voice, but also their particular opinion or attitude expressed. So I think that poem did a nice job of taking the abstract term of voice and expanding upon it. As we're moving forward, before we get to telling the brutal truth, which I thought was a very, very interesting opinion piece from the Times. Remember, when you're looking at the denotation, the dictionary definition, but when you look at it's the dictionary definition, right? But when you look at the connotation, commonly understood cultural or emotional association that some word or phrase carries, in addition to its explicit or literal meaning, which is denotation. Connotation is either described as positive or negative, right, with regard to its pleasing or displeasing emotional connection. An idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literary or primary meaning. And when people try to hide certain meanings of words, right, we have that notion of obfuscation, making something unclear. So let's look at how obfuscation, denotation, and connotation all play a role in telling the brutal truth by Clark Hoyt. And I thought you all did a nice job of answering the questions at the end for exercise 5D. We'll go over them here as we conclude our review of the essay. So first off, if you take a look here, right, a linguistic shift took place in this newspaper as it reported the details of how the Central Intelligence Agency was allowed to strip al-Qaeda prisoners naked, bash them against walls, keep them awake for up to 11 straight days, sometimes with their arms chained to the ceiling, confine them in dark boxes, and make them feel as if they were drowning. That sounds like torture to me, right? And notice how the reference to the word brutal in the title, notice the alliteration with the T and the T. Try to have alliteration in your titles, as I've said all along. Nice. What kind of truth? Nice adjective. Brutal truth, right? As we know, adjectives and adverbs liven up our prose and our titles. And remember, we'll be voting on who has the best title. So try to have a little panache in your title so you get those panache points. Until this month, what the Bush administration called enhanced interrogation techniques were harsh techniques in the news pages of the time. Increasingly, they are brutal. On the editorial page, they long ago added up to torture. The choice of a single word involved separate deliberations in New York and Washington and demonstrated the linguistic minefields that journalists navigate every day in the quest to describe the word accurately and fairly. Let's skip down. The Times is displeasing some who think brutal is just a timid euphemism for torture, and their opponents who think brutal is too loaded. So, if I would, I'd like to draw your attention to the questions, right? Question 1, describe the shift. Well, the question is, do they call it brutal? Do they call it torture, right? Or is it harsh, right? Number 2, why is the editorial of a page not subject to the same restrictions that apply to news stories? Well, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, right, we'll see he makes a really good point that the editorials, right, are letters to the editors, right? And so people express their opinions in it, right? But when you're actually reporting, right, and the op-ed opinion editorials, right? And this is part of opinion, right? It includes people's personal feelings and reactions. But what he's saying is that reporters and editors need to leave moral and policy judgments to editorial writers and readers. But they cannot be so detached that they appear oblivious to the implications of the facts, right? Question number 3, what word do some readers see as a euphemism, right? Brutal, right? Enhanced interrogation techniques, right? How can something be enhanced and brutal? So enhanced is more of a euphemism for torture. It sounds exactly like torture in that first paragraph. But again, when people use obfuscation, they're trying to cover up something they don't want you to know, right? So by obfuscating it as enhanced interrogation and waterboarding, which kind of sounds like a sport, it takes away what they don't want you to know, that it's torture. So essentially, in the conclusion, right, the Times should strive to tell readers exactly what a given interrogation technique entails, as Shane does with waterboarding. That is not as always practical as in the headline. When the paper needs a short description, the word brutal is accurate and appropriate, whether you think the acts were justified or not. Nice use of Rogerian strategy. You don't have to agree with whether they're justified or not, but brutal is an accurate word. So that was the answer to number 5. What conclusion does he reach? And forgive me, I skipped over number 4, right? Let me scroll up here to the idea of Deborah Tannen, because her idea is what? All words have connotations, right? Number 4, what does linguistic professor Deborah Tannen say about words that are not in any way evaluative, right? The search for words that are not in any way evaluative is hopeless. She told me all words have connotations, and here we are, connotation, whether it's positive or negative. So hopefully you're feeling confident understanding how to apply these terms: denotation, connotation, obfuscation, euphemism, abstraction, right? To your analysis of characters to make a point about your abstract term. And again, I stress that everybody uses philosophical counseling, because I think that when you look at the decisions the characters make, you can better understand how tragedy may or may not have been averted if they used logos instead of hidden assumptions and irrational appeals to emotion and hubris. So I hope this video was helpful. As always, feel free to get in touch if you have any questions, and thanks for listening. Till next time.